5 years ago, I found myself standing inside of a narrow hallway in the Centro Stali soup kitchen for refugees, located near the center of Rome. An Afghan man with a small carry-on luggage in hand approached me. He was wearing a light green dress shirt, beige pants, and could have easily been mistaken for a tourist. "You are a journalist," he said, almost in relief and certainty. He began to share his story. In search for a better life, this man had left Afghanistan 4 years ago to join countless Afghan asylum seekers setting sail for Europe. After reaching Greece, he traveled to Norway to seek asylum. During that period of time, he managed to find work and go to school. He became a nursing attendant, a computer technician, a DJ, and a pianist whose music made the front page of the paper in his local city. He pulled out the educational certificates and newspaper clippings from his luggage to show me. By any standard, he is a success story. However, what I learned next was anything but. Despite all of these achievements, his asylum application was denied. He ended up in Italy, and it was only his second day when I met him. At the time, my sister and I were documenting the stories of refugees and asylum seekers in Southern Europe for our project called Living at the Border. I asked him if I could share his story. There was a pause, and he became more anxious when he answered. "You are like every other journalist. You'll come for my story today and disappear tomorrow to work on your next story, while it's still my reality." He added that unless I could guarantee him the help he needed, he was not going to share. I was not in a position to make that promise. I left the soup kitchen that day without his story and a feeling that I'd never experienced before. Although I heard similar comments from other refugees questioning the impacts of their personal stories, the encounter I had with this man was unexpected for me. I was beginning to realize that oftentimes in the West, many people are desensitized to news. However, these refugees were desensitized to journalists and the work that we do. On that day, I learned an important lesson that we as storytellers often forget. Stories don't end. I believe that it is vital to explore narratives in a way that generates understanding and creates hope for one another's journeys. Through storytelling, our task is to expand the dialogue. We have the opportunity to introduce our friends, families, communities, audiences into different worlds and ideas that are often untold or misunderstood. Since that day, I've spent the past few years documenting the stories of people who live on the edge, the margins of society. In 2012, I co-founded an independent production company called Borderless Films with a goal to create impact through storytelling. My focus on the stories of refugees stems from a personal place. My family came to Canada as refugees from Somalia in the early 90s. Stories have the ability to impact the way people see the world and themselves. In the case of refugees, they are often grouped in statistics and defined in numbers in mainstream media. And today, they've become a symbol of tragedy. While the numbers are meant to show the large-scale impact of forced migration, it can also dehumanize refugees and desensitize audience responses to their suffering. That's why it is our duty as storytellers to dig deeper, look for different perspectives, and highlight the multiple narratives of refugees. So, what happens when storytellers take that initiative? You will find stories of hope in the darkest of places. You'll find stories that remind us we're more similar than we think. Stories like Barikama yogurts. Housed in a former abandoned textile factory is Barikama Yogurt, a micro-income project that was created by 5 young refugees from Senegal, Mali, and the Ivory Coast. They sell and produce organic yogurt in Rome. I spent time documenting their stories, and I learned that these young men were part of the 2010 revolt in the farming fields of Rosarno. They were illegally employed as farm laborers in the town. They were exploited and harassed. After 3 African men were shot on their way home from work, the refugees took to the streets. These 5 young men ended up going to Rome, and from there, the founder, Suleiman, connected with a social hub to create Barikama yogurts, which means resistance in his native language of Bambara. 3 years later, I followed up with Suleiman, and today they're operating in a commercial building and have created more jobs for refugees. They've integrated into the fabric of Italian society. This is a story about what happens when refugees create their own opportunities. My recent observational documentary film called 19 Days, that was produced by the National Film Board of Canada, is a window into the lives of refugee families' first few weeks in Canada. Over 11,000 refugees have walked through the doors of the Margaret Chisholm Resettlement Centre in Calgary, Alberta, since 1994. This unique facility was designed in the form of a house to ease the transition of refugees. Up to 70 refugee families lived there for 19 days, and during that time, they're given a crash course into Canadian society, from learning about education to how to open a bank account and healthcare. From a Burundian family that has spent their entire lives in a refugee camp to an urban refugee family from Syria, this film shows you the human side of the refugee resettlement process and the many faces of the global migration crisis. Our goal for this documentary was to advance the dialogue on how we can create more inclusive societies for refugees in our world. Like the Afghan refugee, the young men from Barikama Yogurts, and the refugee families on their new journey in Canada, as you can see, everyone has a unique story, and everyone evolves. And that should be respected when documenting their stories. As storytellers and media consumers, we must realize that stories do not end when the camera is turned off and the interview is finished. Stories have the ability to shape who we are. They can inspire us, rebuild us, or in some cases, as we all know, stories have the potential to harm. And if we're lucky, some stories can leave a lasting impact on our own lives. Thank you.